What's up, guys? My name is Kyle. I'm a certified personal trainer, a licensed physical therapist assistant, as well as a strength and conditioning specialist. And today I want to give you 7 tips for how to stay injury-free while working out in the gym. Now, I have been working out for over 12 years, 15 years now, something in that range. And in that time, I have had my fair share of injuries, from hip impingement, shoulder impingement, labral tears. I even had a doctor tell me that I was going to need a hip replacement. In 2020, I herniated a disc. So I've had a lot of things go wrong. Some of them were definitely in the gym. I would say majority of my issues were in the gym. But a couple of them happened outside of the gym that were just not preventable. With that said, the ones that happened inside the gym, specifically my shoulder, my hip, were definitely preventable. Definitely from just making stupid beginner mistakes. It's only a problem or a true mistake if you don't learn from it, right? So learn from my mistakes. Don't go through my hardships. It took me, at least 10 years to really hone this stuff in. Obviously, I'm not a professional bodybuilder or power lifter. I'm just a regular everyday guy who wants to go to the gym, be healthy, put on some substantial mass and strength. I like my muscles. So keep that in mind. But that said, I do think that these tips will help, beginners all the way up to potentially advanced lifters. So with that said, we're going to jump into it. Definitely stick around for tip number 7. I think that's honestly the best tip that I have and the best thing that's helped me out. So stick around for that. But let's start with tip number 1. Tip number 1 is to eat, sleep, and recover well. I'm putting this number 1 because it's super important, but we all know this. So we say that we recover well, but in reality, a lot of us don't. And I'm definitely the epitome of that, I will say. So I thought I was recovering well. I thought I was eating enough. A lot of times I definitely wasn't. So just a couple quick tips on that, and we'll kind of hammer it out. So eat enough food. You need to be in at least a 250 calorie surplus or maintenance, depending on where your goals are. But I would say that sticking around that maintenance to a little bit of a surplus will 9 times out of 10 keep you from, having these minor little flare-ups or aches and pains. I just got out of a cut, and during that cut, I had more aches and pains, I would say. Nothing that was like an injury, but I definitely just felt my body more often than when I was in a bulk last year, where I felt like a god and could just fling weights around, and I just felt amazing the whole entire time. So definitely eat enough food. Another thing to go for is at least 0.8 to 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight that you have. Super important that you get enough protein. The 0.8 is probably more realistic, but for myself, I feel amazing, and I've had relatively no injuries that at least kept me out of the gym when I've hit about 200 grams of protein per day. So definitely keep that in mind. Eat enough protein. Now let's go to sleep. So sleep, obviously get 8 hours of sleep a day. There's a lot of things you can do to probably make that better. I track my sleep a little bit. I have an Oura ring that's helped me, but I use the Huberman stack. So it's like magnesium, Apigen is another supplement that they use, and then I believe it's L-theanine. I'll take that stack, especially if I'm having a cycle of sleep that's really difficult, or I'm not sleeping as well as I could. I'll take that before I go to bed. It knocks me out. I get a better night's sleep. That's been really helpful, as well as getting up in the morning, getting outside, getting sunlight. First thing when I wake up, just kind of keep my circadian rhythm on check. That's helped out a lot as well. So again, stuff I'll link this down in the description, but stuff we already kind of know. The last thing is drink enough water. Dehydration is real. And so if you're going in the gym and you're not drinking enough water, or you're just feeling even kind of sluggish, irritable, a lot of the times, that's because you probably need more water. You're a little dehydrated, and it's giving you some trouble. So try to drink a gallon of water, a day. That's not a bad thing. See what that does. I say start high and then come down and see what's realistic for you. So, I was drinking a gallon of water during my bulk, but I was peeing a lot. It was tough. And I decided, I'm going to bring this down. So now I think I drink 3/4 of a gallon or something like that, or at least bare minimum 3 of these Nalgees or something. So yeah, drink enough water. That is something to really help you. So let's get on to tip number 2. This is going to really start to get into the nitty gritty. All right, so tip number 2 is to lift using more volume or higher reps. Now, this is definitely going to help our beginners that are watching this video, or that are relatively trained. You might have 1 to 2 years under your belt, but you've just kind of been struggling to take it to that next level. Using higher reps, I'm talking 12, 15, sometimes even toward 20 reps, is, in my opinion, a little bit safer in some ways. I'm not saying that it's optimal by any means for hypertrophy and strength training and all that, but using those higher reps, going for more of a pump at the muscle, metabolic type stimulus, versus going after intensity for a 12-week period, a certain block of time, or even 6 months at a time, you're not going to regret doing that. And why I say that is because it helps you figure out how to gauge what is like your RPE, so your rate of perceived exertion. So it's like, how tough is this on a scale of 0 to 10? A lot of people don't know how to appropriately train toward failure. So I would much rather you lift something that's lighter in weight with a lot more reps and go toward failure than you doing a 1 rep max with 315 pounds on your back. And why I say that is because, I think it's pretty obvious, right? Like, the heavier weight on 1 rep max is going to have more risk associated with it for your tendons, your connective tissue, all that stuff. Whereas the higher reps, lower weight, it's going to have far less risk of injury, right? Like, you're just going after huge pumps at that point. So learning how to go to failure on that end of the spectrum, I think, is very, very, very helpful in the learning process of lifting. And that's something I truly struggled with, was I would try to go toward these lower reps, even higher rep schemes, and I really didn't understand what my RPEs were. I thought for 1 second I would be doing, RPE 5, everything's super easy, and then the next second I would do 2 more reps and I would completely fail, right? So that was just kind of skewing my weights I was using in the gym. I was constantly using either too much weight at times. And it wasn't until I checked myself, I went a little bit lighter on things. I went and started adding more reps versus adding another 5 pounds on the bar or something, that I started to see a lot more results, as well as not feeling as beat up all the time, specifically shoulders and hips. So again, this would look like, I'm going to bench 135, and rather than do 3 sets of 10, and then I add some weight, each set, I instead tried to add more reps as I go. So 1 week is 3 sets of 10. The next week, I'm going to go for 3 sets of 11, 3 sets of 12, something like that. Or I could do 2 sets of 10, and then the last set is as many reps as possible. Stick with that weight for 2, 3, maybe even 4 weeks while I build that volume up, and I get up to maybe like 15 reps. And then from there, I would add weight, drop my reps, and then try to progress it that way. That's a rep scheme that really helped me a lot. And again, it helps your tissues kind of adapt a little more and keeps you from using too much weight and just failing all the time, failing your lifts. That's never very fun. So I hope tip number 2 helps. Let's get into tip number 3. Learning how to grind your reps versus ego lifting. So the point of training is to get to, or at least close to, failure, especially if you're going after hypertrophy and strength. Like, that's the whole purpose of going to the gym, right? We want to get toward that failure point, but in order to do that, we need to understand from, tip number 2, what is actually failure for us. So higher reps can do that. But on the other side of the spectrum, when you start to come back down, you learn that process a bit more, and you come down in your reps and you go toward more strength. We need to understand what is grinding. Okay, so that's where you get toward failure. You might have 1 or 2 reps left in the tank, and you grind through one of those 2 reps by maintaining your form as best as possible as you complete it, right? An ego lift would be, I really don't have those 2 reps left in the tank. I'm already on my last one, but I'm going to still shoot for it. And that's where we see our technique or our form completely fall apart. So you've probably seen or even experienced this in the gym, where you have a good rep where you come down on bench press, everything's good, but you come up and it slows down quite a bit, but you're able to push through and everything feels rock solid as you have that. That's grinding a rep. That's getting toward failure. You could maybe squeak out another one, right? This is kind of an experimental thing, but it probably is better to stop there than to try to go 2 to 3 more reps just because that's what's on, your workout plan for the day, right? So avoiding those ego lifts where, all right, I grinded a couple reps, I feel good, my joints aren't too beat up, but then an ego lift would be, I'm going to keep going, and then that bar turns to the side, and then you're using the front of your shoulder or something like that. Or you squat down, and on the last rep, you're starting to kick out to the side. Again, it's not that this happening occasionally is going to hurt you. It's that repeated, like I go in the gym and that happens, twice a week, 3 times a week, or I'm doing this every time I do this same lift, and I keep it's like me banging my head against the wall. We want good form and technique to the point of getting toward failure. We don't want to supersede that. If we also think too, like if you're kicking your hips out or your shoulders are going uneven and you're using this ego lifting strategy, you will get stronger. There's a higher risk potentially of injury, but are you really hitting the targeted tissue? The whole point of me benching is to build my triceps, my chest, my front delts. So if I start doing this kind of stuff as I'm benching, is that really advantageous? Is that last rep actually building the areas that I want it to, or is it just building one side more than the other, right? So we definitely want to learn how to grind, find that point. Again, that's probably, 2 reps from failure to failure. And then anything that's failure and past is probably more of that ego lift. All right, let's get into tip number 4. I want you guys to do things or exercises that are within your mobility and your coordination. So what does that mean? That means I squat down and I can only get to 90 degrees without any weight. Well, I probably then don't want to load that exercise super, super heavy just because, and go for full range of motion, ass to grass type squats. It's not that I'll probably hurt myself potentially, but it will increase my risk of injury just because my body doesn't want to go there. Seems pretty obvious, right? So I can do one of 2 things. I can improve my mobility, which that's a whole nother conversation piece, but I highly suggest doing that because I think everyone should be able to squat ass to grass. But the other side of the spectrum is just do exercises that fit your mobility where it's currently at, right? We don't want to try to, force a square peg into a round hole. That's not the whole purpose of training at the end of the day. You've decided to train. You're putting time and effort toward it. So why not make it as efficient as possible and just fit exercises to your body versus trying to fit your body into an exercise and ultimately, again, beating your head against the wall, right? So back to the squat example. I can't squat all the way down, but I probably could use a lead press and get more range of motion out of that, as well as create some constraints around me, like the seat, the handles. All these things are going to help me get around that mobility limitation a bit more, but I can still train hard and train my quads and my glutes and the targeted tissues. Now, does that mean squatting is bad for you? No, you should still probably find a way to squat. We know these are tried and true movements. I say this again just to, make things easier on yourself. Don't force your joints in places they don't want to go. So respect your current mobility. As you train and you use that lead press, you should probably see your mobility start to improve over time, or maybe you use some other squat variation besides a back squat. You do a hatch squat, you do front rack position, something like that fits your body a little bit more, and you can still train that targeted tissue. So in summary for tip number 4, do things that fit your body and your current mobility. And over time, we're talking 6 months, years down the road, you'll see these mobilities improve and you can start to upgrade to other lifts that are tried and true, like squat, bench, deadlift, things like that. So I hope that made sense. Let's go into tip number 5. Tip number 5. Again, these are kind of playing off of each other right now. So in tip number 5, I want you to utilize full range of motion. Well, Kyle, why did you just say do exercises that fit to my mobility right now? Well, that's true. But if you find an exercise that has full mobility, utilize it as much as possible. Again, the leg press versus the squat variation example right now. So the leg press, you can get your knees to your chest, no problem. Your bottom, your ischial tuberosities or your sit bone are able to stay in the seat. But you can't squat to full mobility. That's fine. Load up the leg press more to full range of motion, and that's probably going to have a better effect on the targeted tissue, your strength, the muscle that you're trying to train, as well as your, overall mobility, than you just trying to do a squat and force yourself down there and spend time on your ankle mobility and your hip mobility and do all those freaking drills. Just go do the leg press for a little while. Run that for 6 months and then see where you're at. And even though you may not completely, overhaul your mobility with the leg press, you probably are going to put on some substantial size to your legs and get some substantial strength. So utilize full range of motion. Now, say you can squat to full mobility. Utilize that, right? Don't squat just the 90 degrees because you can squat more weight, and especially if your goal is hypertrophy. Utilize as much of your range of motion as possible. The old saying, use it or lose it. Use that mobility, all of it. When I bench, I go as deep as I possibly can, touch my chest, and I'll even pause there and then press out of it. Team full range of motion. Watch a Dr. Mike Israel video. Again, that stuff is really, really, really going to help you maintain mobility and help with also toughening up your connective tissue and your joints in general, because they get used to going to that range. We can also say that this connects to our ego lifting process. We want to use good technique through full ranges of motion. But if you're, say, adding more weight on the bar and your squat stops, going as low as it should be, right? And then one day you put on a little too much weight and then that weight pushes you down past 90 degrees. Well, your connective tissue isn't as strong in those, lower levels of the squat. So again, that could potentially put you at a higher risk of injury at that point. Hopefully that made sense. Let's get into the next tip. Your accessory movements should be unilateral and alternating type movements. These are exercises like a Bulgarian split squat or an alternating dumbbell press, right? I've talked about these a lot on my channel, especially the alternating movements. So these exercises are great for getting really good pumps. You're already pre-fatigued. So you've used maybe a squat or a leg press or a big kind of bilateral movement at the beginning of your exercise routine. And now you're coming to these other exercises which have more of a rotational property to them. That rotation is really good for improving our mobility, as well as, you're only using one side of your body at a time. So when we're doing that, we're sort of mimicking our gait cycle, how we would walk, run, things like that. And it just restores general mobility and can reduce, systemic muscle tone or that stiffness that is required for our heavier bilateral lifts that you potentially did at the beginning of the workout. That's good for that situation, but you don't want to walk around like that on a daily basis. So the more you can kind of restore your range of motion before you leave the gym, you get some good pumps, you still train the muscles hard, but we want to try to use that toward the end of the workout. That's going to keep your joints, that's going to keep your muscles, everything a little bit happier from a day-to-day or week-to-week process. Okay, and tip number 7. This is probably where I made the most of my mistakes in the past, 12, 15 years of training. And that's not using rest appropriately. So this is coming back to tip number 1, but we're thinking about rest days as well as rest times in between, sets of an exercise. We'll start with the rest times. I used to go in the gym and I would do hypertrophy-based workouts, but I would only give myself maybe 60 seconds of rest, especially for like a big lift, like a back squat or a bench press or a compound lift that I was doing. I was using my timer nonstop on my phone to try to track this stuff, and I thought that that was a useful progression. So if I could do 135 on my bench, and then I would try to take my rest times down like I was in CrossFit or something like that. I now know that that was dumb. We need to recover way more before we go into that next set. So that way, one, we can maximize our strength, we can maximize our output on the next set of exercise that we're doing with the best technique and form possible. And if I'm just going back at that extremely quickly, 30 seconds, 45 seconds, 60 seconds with the same weight and the same rep scheme, I'm not going to be able to do what I need to do on that next set. I'm going to start failing. I'm going to start getting toward that ego lifting way faster than I need to be. Rather than on the getting toward failure or something like that, my second rep feels like dog shit as I'm doing my bench press. So I now just rest as needed. I go when I feel ready to go. And that looks like I'm not shaky anymore. I'm not out of breath anymore. I feel good. I don't even look at a timer for that. When I do use a timer is maybe for some of those alternating or unilateral movements, my accessory movements, where I've already had some pre-fatigue. I'm going at it from more of a pump standpoint. And I'm not worried, I'm not using enough weight to really, increase my risk of potential like loading injuries at that point. So rest as needed on your compound or your larger, heavier lifts that you're doing. Now, rest days is a whole nother conversation piece, but I'm trying to include it in here. So I thought more was better, right? So I would go in the gym 6 days a week. I tried 2-a-days a lot of times. And one, my recovery just wasn't ready for that type of stuff. Especially when I was trying to do 2-a-days, I'd either be working a ton and mentally I was not there. I was just trying to push through with caffeine and all this other crap. As well as not fueling my body enough. So thinking like 6 days a week, that probably requires a lot more commitment and a lot more from tip number one than a lot of us are willing to do, right? We're not athletes. We may be more weekend warriors a lot of times. Maybe you are an athlete watching this and that is your full-time job. That's a different conversation. But that said, use rest days accordingly. I now get some of the best workouts and have made some of my best progress working out 3 days a week with a rest day in between because I can go in the gym and feel completely refreshed, right? From a neurological central fatigue standpoint. So, and especially, being busy and having work, like I run a business, I meet with clients, I have a family and all this other stuff going on. Having that extra day in between has been so nice, both from a motivation standpoint, as well as just feeling good when I enter the gym versus 6 days a week where I just destroyed myself the day before. I go in there the next day and I'm still super tired. I'm still a little shaky and jittery. I maybe didn't sleep very well, something going on like that. So use rest days. In my opinion, less is more. Go really hard and be extremely committed to a 3-day-a-week program than go balls to the wall and try to work out 6 days a week with something like this, especially for someone that's prone to injuries. Give your body, the time it deserves, respect it, and, over time, then start to add some days when you need it. This takes time to figure out, but start with a less is more approach. Go at those 3 days with a ton of intensity because you're refreshed from your days off. Again, use something like that than thinking you're a badass and going 6 days a week. All right, guys, so I hope that was helpful. I hope those 7 tips resonated in some way. I definitely learned from my mistakes because of all those 7 things. I've made a lot of mistakes with those exact things. So take those solutions to heart, try them out, see which one works best for you. And I hope that keeps you injury-free, feeling good, and making gains in the gym. So if you enjoyed that video, please like and subscribe to the channel and be on the lookout. I'm trying to post 2 times a week. I've got some new programs coming out here in the next month. Join the email list and watch this video next if you want to learn a little bit more about your anterior tilt.